Welcome to the Stormsurf video surf forecast for the week starting Sunday, January 4th. Looking at significant wave heights for the North Pacific Ocean, we see an area of low pressure north of Hawaii, basically a cutoff low, generating 20-foot seas, but all those are aimed north. No real swell production for the U.S. West Coast expected, though some energy from this has created wind swell that is already hitting Hawaii and is to continue for some bit of time. Another gale, actually a small storm, developed off the Kuril Islands on Saturday, producing about 40-foot seas aimed basically to the east. That should result in small swell for the islands and even less for the U.S. West Coast. Let's dive into the details. First up, let's take a look at jet stream level winds. These winds help direct the track of storms when they form and also support their formation. What we're looking for is troughs. That is a dip to the south, just like what we have here. Energy, in this case about 170 knot winds, are falling into this trough, small tight little trough north of Hawaii, helping to support low pressure there. But also notice here, a bit of the energy is peeling off, heading up into the Bering Sea. That's not good. That suggests a split here and suggests less potential for storm development east of the split point. So there's also another little trough here trying to form north of Japan, and then a big ridge here off the U.S. West Coast. High pressure, that's keeping things high and dry for the continental United States. Let's put this in motion. As we roll it out, the split kind of continues. If anything, it looks like it's going to get worse. And the small cutoff, it's not a cutoff low, but nearly cut off here north of Hawaii, continues into Monday. That sort of rolls out and continues, still just kind of murky, but notice a lot of energy is getting pulled off here into the Bering Sea. This trough tries to get organized, but still just not very organized. One split point there, another kind of a split going on here. The jet stream basically is saying, I don't have a whole lot of energy. That is due to the inactive phase of the MJO, which is currently in control in this region. The MJO tends to feed the jet stream, but we'll get into all that in a little bit. As we roll this out, we notice the jet stream starts getting a little bit more organized by Thursday or so. Winds start building almost 180 knots. Still the split is here, but things are starting to open up east of there. And if we could just get that final split to die off, as it looks like it does by about Friday, and notice winds go up to 190 knots, this is starting to fall into what could be a trough right in this area. As we put this into motion, let's check it out. And sure enough, here we go. We have 200 knot winds by Saturday. A bit of a trough trying to organize here, right in the Dateline region. Still a split east of this area, but you know what? That gives us a bit more area. That opens up the Dateline region for storm production. Still, high pressure has a lock on the U.S. West Coast. And we roll this on out. Notice the trough actually gets more organized as we get into Sunday night, almost Monday. This looks actually fairly impressive with 190 knot winds feeding it. Still big split here. But so that means high pressure in between the split points. That means high and dry here. That means probably good conditions, if not offshore winds for the U.S. West Coast. Storm protection in the Dateline moving into the Western Gulf. Not a bad pattern. This is also suggestive of the active phase of the MJO starting to build over this region. So we take a look down at the surface. Here is the gale that we saw. Seas, we're in the 30-plus foot range here just off the Kamchatka Peninsula. Still 40, almost 45 knot west winds here. And also that other sort of semi-cutoff low going on. Notice the south winds here, 35 knots. That was generating 20-foot seas. But again, all aimed off to the north. This fetch here is all going east to west, not targeting the U.S. West Coast or Hawaii at all. So the only fetch going on really is this here, aimed at Hawaii. Let's put it into motion, see how things play out. Notice the east fetch continues in the Gulf of Alaska, but also some winds starting to develop here on Monday. 35 knot southwest winds and building in coverage to 40 knots by Monday night, aimed at Hawaii and certainly at the U.S. West Coast as well. That continues to evolve and holds pretty nicely. 35 knot winds into Tuesday. Another gale starts building on the Dateline. 35, maybe 40 knot winds, aimed more north-south, not right at Hawaii yet. And yet another gale developing developing over Japan. All this the result of the jet stream starting to get a little bit more organized. By Tuesday night, we're doing pretty well. Still 35-knot winds in the western Gulf, but here we go. 45-knot winds aimed well at Hawaii over a relatively small area, but still a fairly well-organized system, and yet one more system over Japan, but it looks like it's lifting north into the Sea of Japan and not going to make it into the Pacific. Anyway, the main focus becomes the dateline storm, 45-knot winds into Wednesday, and then it starts fading out as it moves east, and things fall apart for a little bit. For a breather at least. But then notice what was the system over Japan starts reorganizing here in the western Gulf, just east of the dateline. This seems to be the preferred region, and notice how the jet stream, when we saw it, there was a bit of a curve here going, so it's got upper level support on Saturday. 35-knot winds over a pretty good area, continuing to evolve, but it doesn't get real organized. But notice the size of it. Large fetch, 30, 35-knot winds, certainly good for like 13-second period swell, certainly for Hawaii and the U.S. West Coast if this all develops as forecast. And here's an interesting little thing. Right at the 180-hour, fetch starts picking up again. Again, large system. So, assuming all works out, at least one swell from a storm here, another swell here, and yet a third one, 3 queued up. This is looking pretty good. So now we look at significant wave heights, North Pacific Ocean, and we're going back in time, almost a week, Tuesday, December 30th. Notice, low pressure off the Kuril Islands. This one quickly wrapped up, almost a little dot there, 40-foot seas. This swell has already passed Hawaii. It is now starting to hit the U.S. West Coast. Pretty nice little bump in surf heights at exposed breaks, maybe 5-6 foot faces, building through the day Sunday. That's to continue into Monday, and then start dropping off. Anyway, that system faded out. We had another one, really small one on Thursday, Friday, not really of any interest. And yet one more is wrapping up on Sunday. We got about 42 to 43 foot seas here. Relative to Hawaii, notice, we'll put the Great Circle paths on here. Notice the energy, notice the arrows there, not really pushing up the Great Circle paths to Hawaii. That's about the 320 or so degree path. But still, sideband energy for sure. Also relative to Northern California as well, actually aimed better up the, about the 302 degree path into Northern California. Again, small swell, probably in the 2 or 3 foot at 18-second range sort of thing, nothing more than that. And then we roll this out. Now we'll go back. Now we're in current. Here we are, the remainder of the third system working its way up towards the Bering Sea. And let's see how things evolve. First off, the gale in the western Gulf. 20, 22, 24-foot seas building to 26, almost 28-foot seas on Tuesday morning. Pretty good size area. That's certainly going to provide sideband swell for Hawaii on a rather northerly track here, about 350 degrees from the core of it, basically. And relative to the U.S. West Coast, about the 286 or so for Northern California and Southern California. Energy down, maybe 287. The core of it's going to be more up like 295, but some should sneak in the swell window. That will be a nice respite from the flatness of the Christmas and New Year's holiday. Anyway, so that sort of cranks up and fades. Next one develops on Wednesday, 32-foot seas, just looking at it, that's probably about the peak of it right there. Mainly a system relative to Hawaii, aimed well up the Great Circle paths on about the 215-degree track. Roll that out, that one fades, and then we go through a little break, but then things start organizing here. That large low that we were talking about, long out on the models, not big sea heights, only in the 20-22 foot range. Oops, and there we go. That's pretty much it as of this model, but still the thought is this will continue to evolve with the jet stream only getting stronger, only getting more consolidated, and the trough starting to build in this area. Assuming the models are right, 7.5 days out, so we'll see, but it looks like a good start. Let's take a look at long term and see what's going on. Here we go, the Southern Oscillation Index. Difference in pressure between Darwin, Australia and Tahiti. Negative numbers represent the active phase of the MJO. Positive numbers, the inactive phase. Notice though, even though we're saying we are in the inactive phase here, we had a good run of negative numbers through about Christmas time, and that was certainly helped support the large swell that hit the Northern California area around the 20th of December. But then since then, things have moderated out, holding about the zero area, but little pockets here and there of negative numbers. That all due to weak low pressure that's been sitting and just hanging over Tahiti, which is a good thing. The 30-day running average here holding in around the, well, currently minus 6.77, but it's been fairly negative. And the 90-day running average minus 8.17. It's been in the minus 8 range since about mid-October. This is good. If it stays negative, that's what sort of one of the indicators one looks for to say El Nino is occurring. And certainly the SOI suggests a very weak El Nino, at very minimum a long-running active phase of the Baden-Julian oscillation. And of course the MJO, when it's in its active state, supports storm development in the North Pacific during winter months. Here's a graphic view of the 30-day running average of the Southern Oscillation Index. Notice in 2013, positive numbers, inactive phase of the MJO, not a whole lot going on, basically a weak form of La Nina. And then in January of this year, February, things just bottomed out. There was massive Kelvin wave activity, westerly wind bursts. It really looked like a significant El Nino was taking root, but then it kind of faded. And then it started coming back, and here we've been since, probably the July time frame, muddling down around the minus 7 or 8 range, something like that. Again, suggestive of a weak El Nino, a very weak El Nino. But still, it's better to have it negative than positive. This is a lot better place than we've been in about 3.5 years, so we'll take it. Next, we take a look at wind anomalies, that is, wind differences from normal for this time of year in this region, specifically north of Australia. Here's the Philippines over here. We're looking for westerly anomalies. Westerly anomalies suggest the presence of the active phase of the MJO. If they persist long enough, they suggest El Nino. Currently, we have weak westerly anomalies over the maritime continent, also now developing on the dateline and building moderately strong, but in a small area. And this has not had a lot of consistency, but there's been this weak westerly tendency now for a couple of days. As we move into here's Mexico, Galapagos Islands down here. Here's your westerly anomalies coming over the dateline to a point south of Hawaii, and then easterly anomalies. So what this suggests is the active phase of the MJO is off here to the west, trying to make headway into the West Pacific. The inactive phase of the MJO is in the East Pacific. That is what's responsible for the high pressure over the U.S. West Coast, lack of rain, and the split point, that is where the jet stream splits, also lines well up with the westerly-easterly anomalies here, just about right where Hawaii is. Hawaii getting doused with rains and bad winds, and then right on the other side, it's a lockdown of high pressure. So here's the dividing point, and probably it's a stretch to say that it's the dividing point for where the active phase of the MJO, the leading edge of it is, because it's really way much further back. But still, interesting thought. Continuing on, a week out, notice this, strong westerly anomalies. Notice a cyclonic circulation here on the north side of the equator. Same thing on the south side of the equator. Certainly looks like what one would think would be a significant westerly wind burst if it were to develop. It's a forecast a week out. Don't believe it for a second, but this looks very promising in terms of the active phase of the MJO taking root. The issue here is if you were in El Nino, there shouldn't be a active-inactive phase cycle. You should have just steady state sort of active MJO, westerly anomalies. That's not been the case at all. Of course, everyone pretty much knows by now that our El Nino isn't even hardly an El Nino. It doesn't qualify officially per NOAA. It's what we're considering a Modoki El Nino, sort of an El Nino, but not really, sort of a faker El Nino. And that continues to be what it looks like's going on looking at the charts. Just the same, having an active phase of the MJO, having westerly wind bursts, that will support storm development. This will eventually work its way to the west, is the thought. That will start fueling storm development more towards the dateline and into the western Gulf, and eventually support rain into California. Anyway, week out, we look in, here's the date line here, and we still have the easterly anomalies suggesting that the inactive phase of the MJO slowly working its way east, but not out of the picture yet. Here's another view, the same thing looking back in time. The reds, purples are the active phase of the MJO, westerly anomalies, but notice here, the date line is over here. When you're back in over here at 60 east, 120 east, you're in the Indian Ocean, and that's where we've been the whole way through December. And what you're really seeing is inactive phase. The Galapagos would be right about here. Inactive phase in the Greater Pacific. Active phase in the Indian Ocean, but per the forecast, we're supposed to, here's that strong bout of westerly winds moving towards the far west Pacific in the Kelvin wave generation area, if this were to happen, and that's only a week's worth of westerly anomalies, but it might help support the develop another Kelvin wave, and we'll get into more about Kelvin waves in a second. The models are having difficulty, you notice the discoloration here, but basically what they're showing, only the statistic model is even viewable today. I'm sure NOAA will resolve that come Monday morning. But what we see is the blues here are the active phase of the MJO, hanging right over the maritime continent. The yellows are the inactive phase, easterly anomalies, westerly anomalies. So you see the inactive phase projected over the next 2 weeks to fade and move east as the active phase works its way east to the date line 2 weeks out. The statistic model, the dynamic model shows pretty much the same thing, maybe just a little bit slower eastward progression. And of course, here is the upper level 40-day model, certainly a bit of a reach, but the greens are the active phase of the MJO areas supportive of precipitation. It shows the active phase here working its way east into about the end of January, let's say, and the inactive phase then working its way over the maritime continent starting about the 20th of January, doing its route across the Pacific, and then another active phase starting to develop into early February. What this suggests is that the MJO is rather healthy. It's doing its thing. That sort of also suggests, if all this is true, that El Nino is pretty much not going to happen. There's no real expectation that it will. Yes, there's tendencies for it to, but typically El Ninos max out in about the last week of December. We're past that point. All we're seeing is evidence of is a more normal sort of a pattern, the alternating active, inactive, active phase, westerly anomalies associated with that dryness, and easterly anomalies associated with the inactive phase. Certainly, the U.S. West Coast is sitting right now or being influenced by the inactive phase, high pressure, no rain, and that sort of shut down about December 20th. And then we figure by about the 15th of January or so, things are going to start waking up in the Pacific, and we'll have a couple of weeks, 3-week run typically of storm development, and then 3 weeks of things shut down. So pretty regular pattern looks to be setting up. Next, we'll take a look at ocean temperature anomalies. That is, temperatures different from normal for the time of year. Notice we're back in August here. We're just going to show a quick run of this quote-unquote El Nino or supposed El Nino development. We never really got anything good. There was cold water here. Yeah, we had a good push in early in the year, then things sort of fell apart. This was the upwelling phase of a Kelvin wave, but we'll pick the animation up from here. Notice warm water started developing in earnest in early September. Kelvin wave activity likely feeding this area, and we'll just roll this out. You notice it continued to get warmer, and we're interested very much in just this area. You notice this big pocket here in October. That was a Kelvin wave impacting the Galapagos Island. It sort of faded out, but notice the water moves to the east, picked up by the trades, and right in here, you're interested in the area 170 to about 120. Here is the El Nino area. We had some pretty good temperatures there, and it was warming up nicely. The yellows and oranges are, of course, warmer than normal anomalies. And then here we go, one more pocket. The last Kelvin wave hit about, it was a little bit earlier in December, but this is, we'll go back a little bit, try to figure out here exactly where it peaked out. It looked like right about there is where it peaked, but this isn't in the Nino 3.4 region. It's really this area at 120 to 170 that we're most interested in. But that warm water will gets blown into the Nino area. And here we go. Here's the last image of the frame for 2014. Still a lightly warm regime. What we need is more Kelvin wave activity. If this was a real El Nino, you would expect to see this whole area full of reds here. We're nowhere close to that. It's just the very lightest of light warming going on. That's all. Here we can zoom in on the Nino 3.4 region. This is actual water temperatures, actual wind speeds. Notice clearly trades in effect, but for differences in normal, here's the anomalies. Water temperatures currently, this is as of January 3rd. Notice only half a degree anomalies here, almost just dead neutral here, and this is the start of the Nino 3.4 region. And then half a degree, a little pocket here and there of 1 degree anomalies. Notice there are 1 degree anomalies starting to show up here again. So if we were to get the westerly anomalies the models project, maybe we could get another Kelvin wave going. Now the question is, will that have any impact on this winter's weather? Probably not. If the Kelvin wave were starting to form today, it would still take almost 3 months to get over to reach the Galapagos area and start warming. By then, you're talking January, February. You're into almost the end of March. And by then, you're already into springtime by then. So the question is, really, what's going to go on over here? If you were to have some sort of a super El Nino or large El Nino develop, typically you start seeing signs of that in the January, February, March time frame. Notice when we, remember when we looked at the Southern Oscillation Index, and if you've been following this for the past year, a massive westerly wind burst occurred in January, February, March, large Kelvin wave, a lot of warm water transported east, and there was much thoughts that a super El Nino was developing for 2014. Clearly that did not pan out. It will be interesting though when you get in these Modoki El Nino situations to see what happens in the second year of the weak El Nino phase. Sometimes they go 3 or even 4 years before a real El Nino forms out of this. The result is continued warming, steady warming. Momentum builds in the jet stream globally, and weather patterns start changing. So you get multiple years of not maybe exceptional surf, but good surf, what most folks would consider normal surf in Hawaii and the U.S. West Coast. Certainly much better than in La Nina years. And now the subsurface view. This is looking at depth. Here is the West Pacific. Here is the East Pacific, looking down about 150 meters. Absolute water temperatures. Notice the X's. These are the anchor lines on buoys and sensors placed on those anchor lines that help determine what the temperatures are. And this is sort of a modeled view based on the sensor output. But it is not the absolute temperatures that matter. It is the anomalies, differences from normal for this time of year. Notice there is no, right here, this is it. This is the last big pocket of warm water. This is the last Kelvin wave starting to erupt, or actually has been erupting over the Galapagos Islands, and then the trades carrying it east. At depth here, we have 1 degree anomalies. This is great. If it was some sort of La Nina, you'd see negative anomalies sitting right here, just choking off, basically forming a barrier, not allowing any warm water to make its way east. That's not the case. We have warm water here. What we need is westerly winds, and we suspect we might get some of that here in the next week or two. So for now, no more Kelvin waves in flight. Whatever El Nino we got is what we got for this year, which isn't a whole lot. Modoki El Nino at best. And here's some data that supports that. Here is water temperatures for the Nino 3.4 area over time. October, we had the peak of our El Nino, or at least water temperatures for that matter, was 1 degree above normal in November 23rd. Here we are in January. Water temperatures are basically dead neutral. That seems a little bit conservative based on the other data we're seeing, but it gives you at least a relative idea what's going on. We're just not anywhere near what one would consider to be a legitimate El Nino, again supporting the hypothesis that this is a Modoki El Nino setup. And finally, the forecast for the Nino 3.4 region from the CFS version 2 model. Here we go. Pretty much, this is what we're seeing. Water temperatures 1 degree peaked out about early November. Forecast to fade into April to about 0.45 degrees. Something like that. Again, though, the model has been very aggressive on this long-term forecast, suggesting 1.9 degree anomalies by, the early September time frame, and probably additional warming beyond that, if one is to believe the model. It's really difficult to hold any of this to be credible this early in the game, but still something to suggest that next year, if we don't do another Madoki year, maybe we'll actually get into a real El Nino scenario. Next, we want to show you something that we're working on the site. Over the holidays, we actually did two things. We upgraded one of our servers, the main server that holds all our data. We're on a newer version server, a little bit more powerful. That should help make data transfer from our application servers to this server, which is how all the models are depicted on the website. A little bit more stable, a little bit more reliable. So that's good news. The other thing that we're working on is getting rid of Flash, Adobe Flash on our website. All the models are driven by Adobe Flash, and Flash doesn't work on any of the iPhones, and it really doesn't work that well on Galaxy phones. You can get it to run on Android. There's a back way to install it, but not the best way to do business. So what we've moved to is an HTML5 JavaScript solution. The models would look like this. They basically work the same way, but instead of having the control up in the corner, it's right smack in the middle. You can scroll backwards, forwards, backwards, or put it into motion. And the neat thing about this is it'll work on your iPhones, iPads, Galaxy phones, you name it, mobile devices, anything with an HTML5 compatible browser should be fine. A little bit of a ban, you probably want 4G if you're using this. But anyway, so we've started, if you look at the site, here we go. We'll just put it right. There's a link here. You can click to it, and it'll tell you how you can test some of this stuff. Here we go. Give you links to some models, whatever. Take a look. Try it. We have our email address here. Write us if you're having problems. We're very interested in knowing whether this works or not. We've converted some models, but they're more the lesser used models. Give it a try. We don't want to go and convert everything back or convert everything over if it's not working for folks. But we've tested on a variety of iPhones, a variety of Samsung products, and iPads, and it seems to work fine. So a little bit at a time over the next several months. Every couple of weeks or so, we'll update another batch of products. The point being, some links will change. So what we're doing is, here we go. In the weather models is where we're starting at. We'll just, links changed. Here's the links that have changed. And then right now it's the snow models that we've done and some precipitation models. So, you'll see that some of the links don't work, and you'll have to update your bookmarks accordingly. But what we're trying to do is for the major models when we get there, the major wind models, the jet stream models, and the wave models, they shouldn't change at all. It's just some of these smaller, more specialized kind of models. There was no way to continue to use the same links. But either way, so just be advised, everything's on the site. Check it out. So for now, it looks like the storm door is starting to open. Small swell hitting California. Perhaps two better swells developing this week, both providing swell for Hawaii, and certainly one of them for the U.S. West Coast. And then long term, it looks like the MJO is going active. A broader storm might be forming a week out over the western Gulf, and provide more opportunity for surf. And then certainly looking at the El Nino situation, maybe not El Nino, Madoki El Nino, but the active phase of the MJO kicking in, so by a mid-January time frame, things should start waking up, and we should start seeing an improved surf pattern with a little bit more consistency, and then hopefully some more precipitation and snow for the Sierra and the Pacific Northwest. So that's it for this week. Hope you all had a Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. We'll do this again next week, same time, same channel. In the meantime, go get some surf. It looks like we're finally starting to move back into a more productive pattern. Thank you.